Hi everyone, this is Oz Fritz back again to jump into chapter 1 of Deleuze's Logic of Sense, which is titled First Series of Paradoxes of Pure Becoming. So Deleuze starts us off by introducing Lewis Carroll's Alice and through the looking glass, and he tells us what he likes about those books is that they tell us about events, pure events. And he connects this with pure becoming by jumping to the part where Alice grows larger or she grows smaller. And what Deleuze tells us is this pure becoming happens in both directions at the same time. This is the paradox. So when Alice grows larger, she's also becoming smaller. This is very puzzling. It was puzzling to me. That's why it's a paradox. But the way he explains it is that when Alice is growing larger, she becomes larger than she is now. And she is now smaller than she will become. So that's the paradox. So I won't attempt to explain it. I don't fully have a full explanation. But at the end of this paragraph, he gives us a very vital clue of how to approach paradoxes, which this whole book is about paradoxes. And he tells us that good sense affirms that in all things there is a determinable sense or direction. But paradox is the affirmation of both senses or directions at the same time. So we acknowledge in a becoming that it can become greater or lesser at the same time. In other words, he's not taking the point of view of Alice that she is either getting larger or getting smaller, but he's looking at it in terms of a pure event. So from the pure event, it goes in both directions at once. And he's telling us the paradox, the way to look at it is to try to affirm both directions, the sense of both directions at the same time. Now, he hasn't told us what he means by sense yet, so we can either apply our own, what we think sense indicates, or he did tell us in the preface that sense is a non-existing entity. And by being an entity, it means it's alive. So he's telling us in a paradox to look for the life in both directions at once. Now, there's another thing from his previous book about that can help us understand paradox. In Difference in Repetition, he's talking about what produces thought. And when he's talking about thought, he's not talking about thinking about what am I going to have for dinner tonight or something like that. He's talking about creative thought, maybe what G.I. Gurdjieff called higher mentation. So not automatic thought or reactive thought, but pure creative thought. So this is the quote from Difference in Repetition. The sign or point of departure for that which forces thought is thus the coexistence of contraries, the coexistence of more and less in an unlimited qualitative becoming. So another way of looking at it is that paradox provokes real thought. Okay, so that's help us understand help us to understand paradoxes. So right after he introduces Alice and the paradox of pure becoming, he says that Plato had a way of providing limitations to this pure becoming. Now, as I said, it's important to try to understand or to have some background on the influences that Deleuze is talking about. So you would need to know, to understand this, about Plato's philosophy of ideal forms, which is that everything we see is a copy of something that the ideal form of that exists. For instance, this cup here is a copy of the ideal cup. We can never get to the ideal, perfect ideal cup. It's in a transcendental realm, but this cup has the essence of cupness that it copied from the ideal cup. And so this is what Deleuze is saying takes us away from pure becoming. What he says about pure becoming is that pure becoming eludes the present, because you can never say this is that because in the present, because by the time you've said that, it changes. So pure becoming has to do with constant changing, and we can never stop it and say, okay, this is something, because by the time we're saying what it is, it's changed. It's a pure becoming. And so what Plato has done is given us these ideal forms, and the way he's caused this sort of pausing in pure becoming or limiting pure becoming, he does this through language. Language is that which can limit pure becoming. Also, Deleuze tells us that language can break us out of this static way of looking things. Language can help us overcome the present back into the realm of pure becoming. So language in logic of sense is examined closely and is a very important part of logic of sense, of how language shapes our perceptions of reality, perhaps helps us to create our personal reality. So language is crucial. He's also calling the paradox of pure becoming, he refers to it also as the paradox of infinite identity. Because of pure becoming, it can become greater, it could become lesser, become more, become less. It has an infinite identities that it can become. And then he goes on to tell us that he gives some examples from either Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass of various reversals, of showing us how regarding pure becoming from both directions. So he, here's some examples from Alice in Wonderland. Which way, asks Alice, sensing that it is always both directions at the same time. Jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today. In other words, the pure becoming is always going into the future or into the past. It's eluding the present. Another thing is reversing active and passive. Do cats eat bats is as good as do bats eat cats. I'm quoting from Alice in Wonderland, or Deleuze is quoting from Alice in Wonderland. The reversal of cause and effect is another one. To be punished before having committed a fault. To cry before having pricked oneself, to serve before having divided up the servings. All these paradoxes occur in either Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. And he's saying that all these reversals regarding the infinite identity of things has the effect of challenging Alice's personal identity of herself, of the contesting of Alice's personal identity and the loss of her proper name, meaning she's going outside what she normally considers herself. Her normal view of herself is being challenged by all these reversals. Okay, I want to, in the last video, the introduction to this, I mentioned how he mentions in the preface about the codings and decodings in this. And I want to just get into that for a second. First of all, before I do that, the realm of pure becoming, another way of stating it is that the only stability is change. Change is the only stability. That's the only constant, is change. This formulation comes from another discipline called magic. Magic spelled with a K at the end of it. And it's also known as thelema, which is an ancient Greek word for will. And this is revealing my bias in these videos because I believe that Deleuze provides a metaphysics for magic. The reason it's spelled with a K is because to distinguish it from stage magic or illusion. And the definition of this kind of magic is causing change to occur in accordance with will. So in the reason I like Deleuze's philosophy for this is because there's so much baggage and nonsense and superstition associated with magic that it comes across. We're just looking at the mechanics of it here. Okay, so in terms of the coding as it appears here, Deleuze talks about becoming in other books of his. In A Thousand Plateaus, which he co-wrote with Felix Guattari, possibly his most popular book, he has a whole chapter. He looks at becoming and he hyphenates it to distinguish what kind of becoming he's talking about. So you'll talk about becoming dash animal, becoming intensity, becoming imperceptible. These are all different kinds of becomings. One of the most important ones is becoming woman. Now, he isn't talking about that in a physical gender sense. He's talking about that in an energetic sense. If you think of the Tao, the yin and the yang, it's becoming woman. It's an important step in spiritual development for men or women. And so in terms of that, just remember he goes on to talk about, he talks about this idea of becoming woman. Now I just want to read you the chapter title, and then imagine that at the end of the chapter title there's a hyphen that goes into the first word of the book, okay? So first series of paradoxes of pure becoming Alice. Becoming dash Alice. That's how he's starting the book, Logic of Sense. And Alice in Wonderland has influenced a great deal of postmodern and esoteric writers, including, I'm talking about profoundly influenced, James Joyce, Aleister Crowley, Robert Anton Wilson, E.J. Gold. These are just the ones I know. I've got a book upstairs. It's a whole book on philosophy based on the Alice stories. Alice in Wonderland is a very common metaphor. We've all heard the expression to go down the rabbit hole. That's referring to Alice going down the rabbit hole and going into a completely alternate world that has different rules than the world she's used to. So the most obvious example in popular contemporary culture that I can think of is the beginning of the first Matrix film, where Neo is getting contacted by Morpheus, and Morpheus tells him through the computer, follow the white rabbit. Of course, again, we need to have a background in Alice in Wonderland. We should know, it's not a bad idea to read it again every few years or whatever. It's an incredibly profound work. So we are becoming Alice, and we're diving into the rabbit hole of logic of sense. Okay, another thing, the consideration of reversals, of looking at something as it's getting more or less, or sort of both directions of its becoming. This is very, very basic Kabbalistic training. This is what you are trained to look at both sides of things, to look at things from the reverse. Okay, that's another thing. Now, I mentioned in the last video that one of the big projects of Deleuze was overturning or reversing Platonism. Okay, he wants to sort of overturn the idea that there are these transcendental ideas that sort of affect our lives, and sort of get us back into the realm of pure becoming, which he hyphenates that kind of becoming in terms of Plato's ideas as becoming mad, becoming dash mad. In other words, pure becoming is taking us out of the realm of an ideal form, making a copy. And when we go outside of that, Deleuze says we are becoming mad from Plato's point of view. Now, I believe the form of logic of sense, he basically shows us right away how he plans to reverse Platonism. And by reversing Platonism, it doesn't mean rejecting Platonism. It means kind of flipping it, like pulling a judo move on Platonism, as it were, because he starts. The first words in this chapter are Alice and through the looking glass. Okay? Looking glass, of course, is a mirror. And when we hold up a mirror to something, or if you were to hold up some writing into a mirror, the writing would be reversed, as we saw it from this side. So what he's saying, and as I interpret it, because the immediate next paragraph, he talks about how Plato, stopped this pure becoming, limited this pure becoming. And he's going to overturn Platonism by holding up a mirror to Platonism, holding up the looking glass to Platonism, examining it, and then through that, it's going to give us a reversal of it. And with that, I'll leave you for now, and you can join me on the next video, which will be on the second series of paradoxes of surface effects. See you next time.